All right. Well, let's get to the reason that we're all here tonight. David Bland. I'm super excited to have him in person since, again, he was our first COVID speaker. And he wrote this amazing book. I have several people brought it to get it signed. I was glad to see that. I already got my copy signed last time. Testing Business Ideas with Alex Osterwalder. It's a great book. His business is Precoil. He's a CEO and co-founder helping companies with their experimentation and innovation. He's an innovation expert. Before that, he worked at Neo Innovation and Big Visible. DavidJBland.com is his website, and he's going to be sharing advice with us on how to test your product ideas with ChatGPT. So with that, please join me in giving David a warm welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited. If nothing else works tonight, my little icon spins. So I'm very excited about that. So it's all downhill from here, really. So yeah, I'm David. I am, wow, I do a lot of things, but I usually help people test ideas. And it's kind of a crazy career track for me. But I just love this meetup. I've come to this meetup as a participant many times. And I've also, as Dan said, helped you kick off or test your COVID launch. And I was here last May with Alex, my co-author, when he gave a talk on one of his upcoming books. Actually, the book after Testing Business Ideas, which was Invincible Company, which is also an amazing book. Really, like all the Strategizer books are pretty good. My background, again, is kind of all over the place. So I kind of blend design thinking and lean startup and business model innovation together. And that's really sort of my background as a designer, and then going into the startup world, kind of during the dating myself a bit, but the dot-com craze, and learning kind of what not to do and what to do for about 10 or 11 years. And then I thought, well, maybe other people can learn from me and maybe I can coach people. And I started doing that around 2012, 11-ish. And that's what I've been doing ever since. And so I work with a ton of companies all around the world and basically just help them with anything that's really uncertain. So I really kind of play in this high uncertainty space. And how do you test your way through that? So I don't really focus on a sector, as you can tell. I work with toothpaste, and I work with paint, and then I work with a SaaS company. But the common thread and how I keep my sanity is because it's all very, very uncertain. And that work, you need a way to kind of test your way through it. And that's what I love doing. So why test your product idea? I think, we all have different kind of takes on product management. I would say a really personal story of mine. Here are all the covers we tested for the book. Okay. So I'm writing a book on how to test ideas. Can't write a book like that without testing it, in my opinion. So in my experience, which sometimes your experience works against you, I thought, you know what? This is the best cover. I know. Like my experience in design, it's got this nice blue little white line, or like a little blue with a white background, kind of has HBR type feel. It's very like a beaker. That's why even test? This is clearly the winner. And for those of you that have the book, you'll notice that wasn't the winner. I have to say, I'll go back a second here. We do have like these lines coming out of the eyeball. And at first I thought, I don't know if I can write a book that looks like this because it looks like Illuminati and I'm going to have hidden codes in the book and everything. And so we didn't really go all out with the blue. We ended up doing sort of like a little, if you have one of the later printing, it's like a little beveled edge that goes across. I don't know, so if you feel it. Yeah, it shimmers. Yeah, thank you. So, but even I get it wrong. All my experience of testing with hundreds of teams at all these companies, I couldn't pick the winner. We had to go test. And by far and away, this one. And we tested in all these different ways. I have a talk. I could always link you all. Maybe I'll send it to Dan and we can share it, of how I tested the book. But even experts get it wrong. Sometimes your expertise works against you. All your biases work against you. So I kind of have this process I follow. I'll call it like EMT process. So like 3-step process. Basically, I extract. So I look at your assumptions. I help you work through that. I love these 3 themes, and I'll get into those here a bit more. I'm not going to deep dive all this stuff today because I do want to share some of the ChatGPT stuff. And then we kind of go through this process of the desirability, viability, and feasibility with regards to your risk. Now, I love this model. I know some people use different circles. So sometimes use usable. Marty likes using that, or valuable. Teresa Torres often uses ethical or sustainable. My co-author Alex uses adaptable. They're all the able words you can put in there. I like coming back to these because time and time again, no matter what industry I'm working in, these sort of hold up pretty well. And so really you have this question of sort of like, do they, that you're going to have to answer the jobs to be done, the value proposition, their pains and gains. Are these real? Are they urgent? Are they pressing? Do you have any evidence that supports these? With viable, it's much more of sort of a should we question of, is this something that's viable? Is this something that we should be working on? Can we sustain this? I think sometimes we skip over that question and we work on things that maybe we shouldn't be working on. I know. All right, okay, let's do this. Show of hands. If anybody had a moment where you're working on a product and you thought, wow, should I even be working on this? Anybody? Yeah, yeah. I did that. I would say the third startup, we all looked at each other and we said, should we really be building this thing? And so we kind of had this moment of, wow, it would have been nice to write down and unpack that risk around should we. And then where we spend way too much of our time still is in feasibility, where it's can we? Can we do this? Do we have the right team? Do we have the right technology? You know, but it does require all three. And so I love this part of this like EMT process of just extract, no matter what kind of company I'm working with and who the product managers are, we can walk through sort of the do they, should we, can we. If you customize this, that's fine, like for your context, but I keep coming back to these three. So the next part is map. And I use this technique called assumptions mapping. A lot of people point to me for creating it. I certainly had a heavily involved in iterating on it. I first learned it working with Jeff Gothelf and Josh Seiden, who were at NEO with me. I was near San Francisco. They were based out of New York. You could also point to Laura Klein's work. She has assumptions mapping, Janice Frazier. There's all these great minds that have a version of this 2x2. I think what makes the one I have a bit unique is that I'm using those themes of desirable, viable, feasible as part of the prioritization. So basically, this is the third iteration of that 2x2. So I like importance and evidence. So important is, is this important to the business? How important is this that would have to be true for this to work? Evidence is a little more tricky to work through. In the book, I try to sort of codify this a bit. But basically, I'm going from, hey, do you have evidence or not? I know it's not that straightforward. One thing Teresa did that I really liked is she asked if she could include this in her book. And then I realized she used light evidence and strong evidence. And I thought, that might be better than what I have. So I might come back and reborrow that from her. I haven't decided yet. But this idea of, is there any evidence to support those assumptions we wrote down and we extract it? So extract and then map. And then we test, okay? And that's one of the major reasons I wrote this book is because I would work with teams. They would do interviews and surveys, maybe a landing page, and then build the whole product. And they might iteratively build the product, but they're still building the product. And so I thought, well, I've always given this advice of other things they can do. Maybe that should be in book form, which is why Alex and I wrote the book. Now, with testing, I'm really dialed into this top part of your assumptions map. So we should call this, you could call this like a leap of faith assumption from like Eric Ries, or riskiest assumption, however you want to frame it, right? But we're trying to dial in on what are the most important things that would have to be true where we have the least amount of evidence. And I've made this mistake in the past where I got teams really excited about experimentation. I used to coach a travel company, a well-known travel company in San Francisco, and I got them really excited about experimenting. And then I realized, oh, we're not actually experimenting on things that really pay down our risk. And we're busy. We're all busy running the experiments. That wasn't an issue, but we weren't necessarily paying down the risk. So sort of out of a force of need in my coaching, I kind of landed on this 2x2 as a way to focus teams. And I work with founders this way too. Focus on importance where we don't have a lot of evidence. So for the experiments, we can't really cover all today. There's 44 of them in the book, but I will share some prompts with you today that I use. But I kind of used a lot of inspiration from Steve Blank and 4 Steps to the Epiphany, which was sort of the precursor to a lot of lean startup work. And he kind of frames things as discovery and validation. I thought that worked really well, but he was framing it customer discovery, customer validation. And I thought, well, I want to go beyond just the customer, so let's do overall discovery and validation. And so from an evidence point of view, you're kind of going from none to light. So these are more sort of exploratory experiments where you're trying to figure out, is there any evidence whatsoever these jobs, pains, and gains exist? Is there anything that we can observe where there's a there at all? Okay, so it's a lot of exploratory. There's not a lot of value exchange in this experiment list and discovery. You're sort of just going off and discovering. Now, with validation, this is where you think of the real value exchange with customers. And from an evidence point of view, you're trying to go from light evidence to strong evidence. So this is where we kind of use this term MVP. And I tried to write a book without using MVP, and I was not successful. However, it's kind of hard to see here because it's small, but I try to get to the types I see in my coaching. Okay, like concierge, where people are doing it manually, right? There's a value exchange that's happening, but it's manually. Or something like a Wizard of Oz, which is kind of like concierge, but it's not obvious a person's involved. And so that's where it gets its name from, Wizard of Oz. You're still delivering value to the customer. Other things such as sort of like a single feature MVP. So think of doing something at the core of your value prop and doing it really well. You can almost think back to Foursquare when it first started, right? You would just check in. Another good example would be, do you remember those Amazon sort of like dash buttons? Those little physical buttons that you'd press and it would just order a thing? Well, interesting enough, Amazon was testing Alexa strategy with those buttons because back then not everything was connected to the internet. So you put that button on your washing machine. Oh, I need Tide. I would just press it and it would order Tide. So they were really trying to test away from screen experience with that. Once they found out people would use it, obviously you don't need the buttons anymore because your washing machine talks to the internet and it orders stuff for you. But I think it's a really good example of a single feature MVP. And then mashup, which I'm seeing more and more, it's a type where you're mashing up existing technology to deliver value, different products and services. You could do software or hardware. I feel as if we talked about Mark's talk here with Tesla when he came, early days Tesla. I would view that as almost like a mashup, right? The first mule where they mashed up parts of a Lotus Elise and other parts to make that MVP. So I really have a hard time being in a meeting and people are arguing about what MVP means over and over again. I have traced it back to Frank Robinson's work, which is pre-Steve Blank. And even though the website's not up anymore, I have a copy of it that I downloaded. And it was really about value exchange and reducing risk. And I think somehow we lost the narrative along the way with that. But I try to bring it back to, what are the types? What are the things we're doing to pay down our risk where there's a real value exchange with customers? Sometimes in our customer interviews, there's not a real value exchange. There's a lot of us extracting information, trying to learn, are these jobs, pains, and gains, do they exist? Can we prioritize them? But when you get further along the journey, you should be doing things where there's a real value exchange. So again, we can always talk afterwards if you have more questions about this. So one of the things I realized, and this is almost, it's almost reminiscent of early days Agile, where people had a very hard time adopting Agile because there was so much uncertainty about where you were going. You have all these sprints or iterations. Executives and management would really struggle with, where's our plan? They're used to plans. How do we plan for this? And so I'm noticing some of that with our experimentation work and product now. And my compromise there is, well, can we have a sequence or a plan of how we're approaching discovery and how we're approaching paying down the risk? And it's worked really well. And so think about almost like sequences. So for example, you might do a customer interview, but from there you might take the notes of your customer interview. You go online and start searching discussion forums to see, do we see people at scale searching for the things we heard in the interview? From there, you might go off and do search trend analysis and see, okay, are there people writing things on discussion forums that are also seeking things in Google? One of the things Alex and I worked on was, it was a product about mouth pain. And what I noticed was it was really hard to target people with mouth pain, on Facebook and on social media and drive them to a page. It's like, how do you segment by mouth pain? And so what we realized is, well, people are searching in Google, which you probably shouldn't, for mouth pain solutions, right? And that's where we found the people to pull into our page. And we had learned this through interviews, but once we put what we heard in the interviews on discussion forums into search trend analysis, we started understanding that we could serve them up an ad in Google results to pull them into our page, and it worked really well. We might do some boomerang testing. So that's something I don't hear a lot of anymore, but it's like competitive user testing. So, we'll actually point people at a competitor's product and then interview them about how it went, cycle time, lead time, were they able to get through the process really well. From there, you might do something like a data sheet where you spec out what you could build, but you haven't built it yet, and test with people as well. And then maybe go to a pre-sale, something like a Kickstarter or a crowdfunding through Indiegogo, and then maybe mash it up as an MVP. So this is a plan, but it can change, right? At any point where if we learn something different, we may go back, and that's okay. But what I'm noticing from leaders and stakeholders is it starts to speak their language. As product people, how are we paying down risk? How are we going after this risk, and what's our plan to address it? And so what I'm noticing is we have a plan we can put in front of them, and we often even theme these plans with those three themes of risk: desirable, viable, and feasible. So I could say, here are desirability assumptions. Here are the experiments we're going to run to address those. Here are our viability assumptions in our experiments. Here's our feasibility assumptions in our experiments. And so when you get stakeholders talking that language of desirable, viable, and feasible, which they do, it usually does resonate with them from my experience, then you can start to pay that down a bit and put together a plan and have a more conversation rather than we're going to just test things and see what happens. That usually doesn't land quite as well. So extract, map, and test. Again, it's very iterative. And I wanted to give you this baseline before we get into the GPT part of today, because this is what I'm using to augment, with GPT. So we're extracting, we're doing our assumptions map, we're looking at our top right, we're picking the riskiest things to go test, and then based on what we test and learn, we'll update our map, and then we may even go back and update some of the assumptions we have. So it's kind of a plug and play sort of framework, and what I love about it is I work with all kinds of different companies, and there's all these different canvases that you can use, right? Or empathy maps, or you have roadmaps. There are all these different artifacts you have that have assumptions embedded inside them. And so using this extract method, you can look at the artifacts you already have, and you can start asking yourselves, well, what are the desirability assumptions we're making in this? What are the viability assumptions? What are the feasibility assumptions? And once you get those written down, I literally use just sticky notes. Then you can start to prioritize those and then go test. So I know in the book, I have the canvases, and you go from a canvas to a map. In practice, though, you can go beyond just using canvases. It's whatever you have. Do you have a story backlog? There's a good chance the stuff up at the top makes a lot of sense, and the further down you get that backlog, it's not going to make much sense at all. So how do you drive out ambiguity in your backlog? You can start using these themes to extract the risk in your backlog. Or you have a roadmap, a product roadmap. What are the big assumptions you're making in your roadmap? Okay. You have an opportunity solution tree. What are the big assumptions you're making in that? You have a user story map. What are the big assumptions you're making in that? One of my favorite exercises, I got to work with Jeff Patton years ago, was taking a story map and then writing these assumptions down across the story map and using those to feed into, right, our prioritization. So I try not to be too dogmatic about it because I work with so many different types of companies. But the one thing I do come back to is these three themes of desirable, viable, feasible. How do we extract those? How do we map those and prioritize those? And how do we go test? Right. So I just wanted to share sort of that framework with you before we jump into the GPT stuff, because I want you to see where I'm coming from. I have a healthy level of skepticism about GPT, even though I'm giving a talk on it today. So I would rather it not just press a button and do all the work for me. I'm much more a fan of sort of the human in the loop approach, where it's doing some stuff, but I'm reviewing what it's doing and I can change things. So I had to put this in there. So how many of you heard, like, I have a great idea for a product? Have you heard that this week yet anyway? Like even this week? The week's not over yet. You still might hear it tomorrow. So I see product people just freeze sometimes at this, or worse, I see their teams freeze because it's like, oh my gosh, are you really asking me this again? Are you really saying you have a great idea for a product again? And it's almost like I don't even know where to start. I don't even know where to begin about how to unpack the risk of this thing you just were really excited about and told me. So I'm kind of conflicted. I love innovative ideas, but I don't find ideas innovative, if that makes sense whatsoever. So the idea is, it is an important part, but I find the more important part is testing the idea, how you shape that idea. And I learned that firsthand through all the startups I worked at. We started off as a B2C, platform, and we ended up being a B2B company before we were acquired for 16 million. We would start with something we were sure was going to work, and then as we tested it, we realized there's a different shape to this, or maybe a different segment, or a different way this thing looks. And so I've seen this play out time and time again through the companies like Coach. It's really hard to pick winners. It's really hard to pick a winning idea early on. Even out here in the valley, a lot of people passed on Airbnb because it's like, oh, you're just competing with hotels. That'll never work. So I've been pitched so many things. I may have mentioned this last meetup. I've said this story so many times. I was on a startup reality show, so don't ask. It wasn't a very good reality show. Well, okay, let's put it this way. Nobody wants to see me coach startup founders. It does not make good reality TV. Anyway, I was pitched this kitty litter product that was in my workshop, and I was trying to reserve judgment. And in my head, I was like, "Oh, this is the dumbest idea I've ever heard. Like, there's so many different types of kitty litter. Why would you ever create another type?" I was walking in Target to buy litter for my cats a couple months ago, and there is their product on the shelves. And it makes millions and hundreds of millions of dollars. And I thought, wow, I was really wrong when she pitched me that idea. Like, all my biases were creeping in, and I was judging her idea, but it ended up being a very successful one. So what I try to do instead is I try to put that on the back of my head. Like, I try to make space in my head to say, I'm not going to judge your idea unless it's really extreme. I'm going to say, how do I help you work through your idea? How do I help you unpack risk in that idea and go test that idea? I found that's a more healthier way to approach it versus just picking ideas kind of like Caesar, whether they work or not. So, enter ChatGPT. So what I noticed was, first off, where this would hit me sort of sideways was I was running workshops because I do lots of workshops for companies. We go into our breakout rooms. I said, go do this exercise. We're going to come back. And I go to our breakout room, and the team has ChatGPT up, just putting in anything that would give them answers. And I thought, oh, wow, I need to get ahead of this because I see people using it in ways that I think it's going to steer them astray. So it was more by necessity that I got pulled into it versus me just being hyped up about GPT. So most of you probably know what GPT is, right? It's more of I use Chat GPT the most, but there are many, many different versions now. There's all these different versions of AI. I'm going to just focus on GPT for tonight's talk or this evening's talk. But there are many different things out there that you can get into. What? So I was thinking I could bring a case study to you today and kind of play with the prompts that I was going to share with you. So I haven't shared these prompts with anybody until today. Or we could kind of like pull everybody, and you'll have to help me with this because people online can respond too, okay? I thought we just pull everybody and see what we wanted to work on, right? So this is sort of a interactive part of tonight's talk. So what I'm going to do is, if everything works properly, I am going to pull up my Mentimeter and present, hopefully. Okay, so if you have your phone, you can scan that code. By all means, you don't have to, but it'd be great for you to participate. Those of you online, you can also scan. So I'll leave it up for a minute. You put the link. Thank you. You're on this. So this is what we're going to do is I want you to submit your ideas and then we're going to vote. Okay? I do reserve right to veto the idea, by the way. I do want us to get the most out of the exercise. Uh, great. Cat litter. Yeah, I already see it. So maybe something other than cat litter for tonight, but please from e-commerce website, invisible clock. Oh, you're gonna make this difficult on me. Okay, we'll get some ideas in, and then we're gonna vote on them. I'll give you a few more seconds. I know people online are still getting in there as well. Oh, are they not able to get in? No, no, it's all in. All right. Well, we'll let people put some more ideas in. We're getting some in there. AI-powered killer drones. All right, we're gonna give you a couple more seconds to get ideas. There's plenty of ideas in here. The smart cat door one's interesting because I have seen smart cat doors recently. I was pitched on that. Interesting enough, the other cat circumvented the security of it because they waited for the cat with the smart collar to get through, and then the other cat split through. Yeah, it's interesting. Okay, now we're gonna start moving. So give you 5 more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. So you get, I believe I have it set for 3 votes. So vote for what you want to see, and we're gonna run it through our prompts and see how we do. Give you a few seconds to vote. You can vote for your own as well. You're drawn to it. All right, let's start seeing results here. Class for AI and product strategy. All right. The smart cat door. We're gonna end up with the smart cat door, aren't we? Anyone else have votes? We have 10 responses with votes so far. Are they locked? Oh, my bad. Yeah, I don't think it's gonna do it now. Let me see. Is it gonna let you vote again? Okay.
Yeah.
There you go. Sorry about that. I got excited to see what the results were. I'll give you more time to vote.
It won't take a minute, so you hit submit. So.
Oh yeah, I hit submit too. Give you a little more time to vote. See, 5 people voted, 6. All right, so that number's going up. That's good. All right, we'll give about 5 more seconds here. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. All right. Oh, okay. So I have to choose one anyway. So we have a solution to translate a backlog or set of PRDs into an evaluated canvas, AI-directed mental health coach, and AI-powered city walking tours. I would say because we have a product crowd, maybe we run with the first one, which is the solution to translate a backlog or set of PRDs into evaluated canvas. So thank you for playing along, everyone. And then we can, I'll just copy and paste this in. So we have it. Sorry, it's so small in here. I got it. I'll just, this canvas part. Okay. So I want to put this, actually, I'm going to come back to this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump in and sort of start walking through these prompts. I'm going to share all these prompts with you, but I want to show you sort of the work you need to put in to be able to do this. So I'm just going to use ChatGPT for today. And so what I've been doing with GPT is using it as human in the loop to help teams with sort of this blank canvas or blank sheet syndrome I see when people are giving them ideas and they're just stuck. Because even though it's a 3-step process, extract, map, and test, I've seen people freeze and they're not sure. It's almost like you don't know what you don't know. So, like I said, I'm going to share all these quotes, all these prompts with you before we leave. So basically what I did is I said, look, you're a product experimentation coach. Here are the themes of risk that I want to walk through. So remember the 3 circles. And then I want you to basically, I'm going to give you an idea and I want you to start generating assumptions for that idea. All right. So that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to go back to that idea that I was copying earlier. Again, I apologize. There's going to be a little back and forth with this one. So Canvas, now it's going to ask me who the target customer is for this. So you are product managers. Who's the target customer for our tool? Software product managers. We'll go with that. For software product managers. So what it's doing right now is it's using that framing. Now, I use desirable, viable, feasible. If you want to use valuable, if you want to use ethical or sustainable, what it's going to require of you is to write down what those mean. So that's a little bit of the work here in the prompting, but you'll get this standard set of prompts and you can go and just customize them after tonight if you want to. So if you notice, a couple things that I ask it to do. So I have it start with I believe or we believe. If it's just me, it's I believe. If it's a team, we'll start with we believe. It's nuanced, but this idea of a belief kind of opens you up to the fact that it's an assumption that you might test. And so I don't have it spit out requirements. I have it spit out assumptions that start with I believe and we believe. It's kind of subtle, but I do believe that little change in wording has a big impact on the mindset of the people I'm working with. If you notice, and again, this is new, so I haven't used this idea before. It's saying, I believe software product managers struggle to prioritize and evaluate their backlog or PRDs effectively. So these are desirability ones, right? About the jobs to be done, pains, gains of the customer. I believe software managers will find value in structured, automated way to analyze and visualize their backlog. I'm not going to read all these. I believe software product managers will trust and rely on an AI-driven or automated system to evaluate their backlog. I have worked with some teams. One of the case studies in the book was Topology Eyewear that's based out of San Francisco. And they had a thing that would measure your face, and then they make glasses that fit your face. A lot of people didn't trust it. They didn't trust it would measure their face properly. So it was a trust thing they had to get past. But I ask it to do usually 5 to 8. Now, this is something I've learned in my coaching and workshops over the years. I don't want 20 per theme. It just gets way too messy and the teams get overwhelmed. You have to time box it. So I like 5 to 8 is a good starting point. So those were the desirability ones. You'll also notice there are viability here as well. So these are more about the should we. I'll just read a couple. I believe software product managers are willing to pay for a solution that helps them evaluate. So willingness to pay, skin in the game. I believe companies and teams will allocate budget to improve backlog management and decision-making process. I believe the cost of acquiring customers, so the software product managers or teams, will be lower than their lifetime value. So a lot of these probably are sounding very similar to what you would use if you were doing this on your own. And then feasibility is, again, the can we do this? So I believe it's technically possible to analyze and interpret a backlog of PRDs. So that's, a big thing. I believe we can access the necessary data. So if it's in Jira or Confluence or GitHub, I believe we can develop a robust evaluation framework for this. So you start to see how it's going to look through that as well. So that's just like the first one. So the extract part is the extracting. Now let's go through prioritizing. So I prioritize on importance and evidence, remember? So let's prioritize these on importance. So what it's doing is it's going through and saying, here are the ones that I think are really important to the success of this product. And you'll notice not everything's the riskiest assumption. And that's what I find with my teams as well. So my teams are not necessarily, it's usually an anti-pattern. If I do that 2 by 2 and I see all the assumptions lined up across the top, it means your team's having a hard time prioritizing, basically. So here, it's prioritizing on high, medium, and low, and it's doing them for every theme. So it's doing it for the desirability assumptions, for the viability assumptions, and for the feasibility assumptions, okay? So that's the kind of one axis, and we'll take questions here at the end, right? Oh, I actually don't know if I can make it bigger.
Or is Zoom. I can make text bigger. Here, Command plus. Yes, Command plus. Down 3. There. It's up 1. Yep.
Okay.
Do it again.
Sorry. Okay. That better? Okay. That helps probably people on the Zoom too. And then it does feasibility, all right? So we're looking at desirability, viability, feasibility, but ranking them on importance. So that's just one of them. And then I say, okay, let's rank on evidence. Now, this is a part that's really surprised me over the last, let's say, 6 to 9 months, is that now it's able to go through the internet and start looking for observable evidence. And so that was a challenge I had early on when I was working with these prompts, was that it couldn't necessarily find the evidence and it was just sort of taking its best guess. Now it can actually cite sources depending on how you do this, but it starts to go through and say, okay, is there any are there any assumptions, or sorry, is there any evidence on these assumptions? So it starts to do the sources. Now from there, we start to create our draft experiment. Remember I mentioned the experiment plans? So we start creating the experiment plan. So I gave it and again, you'll get all these prompts, but I gave it some guidance about how to start building a plan based on what was the most important with the least amount of evidence. And again, this isn't a plan that's going to be static. It's not something you just blindly follow, but you're starting to see how you can begin to draft out what your plan could be and use it as a starting point for something that is relatively new that you've been handed as a product manager. So you'll notice here, it gives a summary of the idea. So this solution aims to create a backlog of PRDs and evaluated canvas. The goal is to automate the backlog prioritization and evaluation and helping product managers make better decisions. And then it's pretty much created a table, right? So it's created a table where you can start looking at, okay, so from the high evidence, light evidence strength point of view, we have a set we could start with. So the product managers struggle to prioritize. That would be pretty high because if you get that wrong, it's going to be really tough to sell this. I believe product managers will find value in it. I believe software development product managers will adopt the solution over existing prioritization frameworks. So it's a switching cost thing. Viability that they're willing to pay, and then technical feasibility. It's saying, is it technically possible? But I would say this out of all three themes is probably the most limited on how it could give advice, because you're going to have to weigh on your expertise, what you have at your disposal to obviously go through feasibility.
How does it decide the importance for the top one?
Yeah, so it's basically like just using LM to go through and say, this is what I think. So it's using the reasoning to say, this is what I think is the most important to make this work. And some of that is based on the prompt, where it's like, well, what would have to be true? So it's hard to see because we were way back up here. I'll scroll all the way back up here. So this was probably too small for you to see at the beginning, so I apologize. But I'm saying, I want you to generate the list of risky assumptions that would have to be true for the idea to work. So it's going through and reasoning and saying, these are the things that would have to be true. And then I'm using the themes of desirable, viable, feasible. And then when we went to the actual extracting and mapping, we used sort of this high, medium, low. So this might help answer your question. So high are these the riskiest assumptions that have proven false, could like cause the whole thing to fail. And then medium is more like this is less important. Then low is like not important for the immediate anyway. So usually I'm using these for 6 to 9 months out. I'm not trying to project 5 years or something like that. So I'm giving it, and you can always tweak these, but I'm giving it guidance on what high, medium, low mean. The same way with evidence. Again, this was probably too small to see earlier. I'm saying light evidence is like surveys, opinions, what people say. So I'm talking about the say-do gap. Medium evidence are like call to action, so something like email submission, whereas strong evidence is more definitive actions such as prepayments with having real skin in the game. It aligns pretty well to the book because I'm training this on the book when I'm doing this with my custom GPT work, where I'm trying to say, is this light, medium, or strong evidence? In that if you don't give it this, I feel like the results I get are all over the place. So I like setting the parameters of what light evidence means, what medium evidence means, and what strong evidence means. Yeah. And so as we go through this process, and I know these prompts are really long, so I am going to share them with you. So we're trying to get to a point where we can get to a plan, basically, or a draft of our plan. And so what we've narrowed in on, not all the assumptions, but the ones that were high importance with light evidence, so that'd be the top right of your 2x2. And then what kind of experiments could you run? Again, it's getting cut off here a bit because I blew it up, but it's starting to say, like, what's the experiment I could do and what would I measure? And then what the acceptance criteria would be. So you might want to conduct 10 to 15 interviews with software product managers, measure the common themes and challenges. And then, your acceptance criteria, I usually set the bar pretty high on these too. At least 70% express significant pain points. So you're trying to draw a line in the sand to say, does this experiment generate evidence that supports the assumption, or does it more refute it? Okay. And then what you can do at the end of this is you can download it. So it's starting to give you a timeline And then I didn't really cover this, but every prompt I have, it has this sort of like, hey, does this align with you? Do you want to make any edits? So even though I did this really quickly because of time today, any point along the way, the prompts are set up so you can go in and edit and change things if you don't agree or if you want to shape things a little differently. So it's a prompt to generate or extract, make any edits you need to do, prompt to start mapping on importance, make any edits you need to do, prompt to map on evidence, make any edits you need to do, come up with some experiments, make any edits you need to do. And then you can save this as a downloadable file. So I usually save these as PDFs. Okay? So, and we'll take time for questions as well. But from a prompt point of view, trying to give you some like more what these look like. So going with extract, map, test, I'm going through extraction, right? Here are the prompts, which you'll get. The mapping, which is for importance and then evidence, and then creating an experiment plan and then saving it. So again, I begrudgingly got pulled into GPT because my teams were using it kind of all over the place. My favorite was a team that took all my book and fed it into GPT. And the first thing it said was, you should start building right away. And I was like, how did it say, how did it read my book and think you should start building right away? So basically, these are the prompts that I just shared with you. If you scan that code, that's a free PDF you all can grab. This is the first time I'm sharing these prompts. I have other prompts for things I use, like getting buy-in and all that. But these are free for you all to use and customize. By all means, you'll have my contact information. If you have questions or you tweak it and you say, hey, I made this little change to it, can I run this by you? By all means, do that as well. And so I feel as like your company doesn't need more product ideas. You need a better way to test your product ideas. GPT is here. AI is here. I think it's, you get on this train or not at this point. I was kind of pulled onto the train. And the way I was pulled on the train, I felt, if we do this and we use it, let's do it with humans, product managers in the loop, give it prompts we can edit and change and use it to augment like an extra team member or something where my team is just suffering from blank slate syndrome. They cannot write down any assumptions. They're just staring off into space. Let's get them started. Or they're having a really hard time coming up with experiments. They just want to do interviews and surveys all the time. What other experiments could be useful to them? Draft out a plan and then use that to go edit. And so I believe it can help you in the testing process, and that's how I use it in my day-to-day work.
Thank you so much for showing the QR code you got.
Yeah.
And then
One thing is, did we look at the actual test plan? Can we pull up the test plan that it actually said? At the green things, like the I saw that it saved it, but like back on the ChatGPT, it was how does that look for the timeline?
So I like that it goes from discovery to validation. So it starts with early stage discovery and then moves into validation. I think where it could use some tweaking still is, I think it's a pretty aggressive 90-day timeline for at least my clients. So I do think you're going to have to use this as a draft and then manage your timeline accordingly. But going through the discovery process and understanding jobs, pains, and gains and prioritizing that, and then moving into more value exchange, I think it captures a lot of the spirit of that as well. And so you'll notice it's getting, well, it was getting cut off, but this idea of, what am I going to do? And then how am I going to measure it? I see a lot of my teams getting caught up in measurement and acceptance criteria. And so even giving some kind of baseline is better than nothing there. Because I know my co-author, Alex Osterwalder, in the May meetup, he was talking about the test card, right? If you look at the test card from Strategizer, it's in my book. It's also in his books. It's in Value Proposition Design as well. It goes, here's the hypothesis, here's the experiment, here's the measurements, here's the acceptance criteria. Out of all those 4 boxes, where I see my teams get hung up is in acceptance criteria. They have no idea what to put in there because they're afraid of being held accountable to that number, and they're not really sure what good acceptance criteria looks like. So you can use this at least to get a draft of that, where you're saying, hey, at least 50% of respondents need to express interest, or at least 60% of participants, would say they consider switching. So it starts giving you at least some numbers you can work with. Now, obviously, you want to come in and change those over time for your context. But I've seen enough teams, I don't think they struggle too much on the assumptions. Sometimes the experiments are tough because they just don't have a lot of expertise or firsthand experiences with a lot of those different experiments. And so the book helps you broaden that a bit. And then they start getting a little stuck when it comes to measurements and acceptance. So I would say use this as a draft to get you started and then come back and iterate on it.
Great. Thanks. Okay. You're gonna open up for questions?
Yeah, let's open up
Cool.
questions.
Cool. And if the way it works is to ask a question, you have to have a mic so we can get on the mic on the camera. So if you don't have a mic, don't ask your question. We'll get you a mic. Here you go.
This is a great talk. Thank you. I definitely have a love-hate relationship with ChatGPT. I use it a lot, but I argue with it a lot. And sometimes the answers that it gives you are obviously wrong, and you're like, what is this? But for instance, one of the things that struck me as likely a very risky assumption was that people will trust the results produced by AI. But if I saw it correctly, ChatGPT did not flag it as one of the riskiest assumptions, right? So what do you do when it gives you answers that are plausible? They're not obviously wrong, but every bone in your body says this is a risky assumption, and yet ChatGPT does not flag it as such.
Yeah, I think what's challenging sometimes is that if we ran that same idea through 4 or 5 different times, we're going to get different data sets potentially. Um, I think what we have to be careful of are biases in the GPTs themselves. So I have a podcast called How I Tested That, and I just interview people about how they test things. And it's not out yet, but I just did an interview with somebody who was an expert in GPT, and he said what was challenging him right now was that it almost starts off as net neutral when you start interacting with it, and then it starts trending towards pleasing you. And so the more it gets to know about you, the more it wants you to interact with it, and it'll tell you things that you want to hear. So that's one of the reasons I try to be very prescriptive in my prompts about what I want it to do. And then I also, you can go off and turn off memory, so it doesn't have that shared memory of all your different conversations, and therefore it's not pulling all that stuff back in. So there are different ways, but I do think it is a challenge. He said he was testing a book idea with GPT, which I think is a fine enough starting point. And it said to him, or it literally had a response said, "This is the best book idea I've ever heard." And it really made him angry because he's like, one, you never heard this book idea and you're not really a you. And like, he was getting really emotional about it on the podcast. So I do think we have to be mindful that I find it trends towards being more positive. And I do think when you write your prompts, the way I do them anyway, I'm trying to write them for it to be critical in a healthy way. So it does take some maneuvering, but um, back to your question though, that's why I have that human in the loop part where if I see something, I will go back and edit it too. And I'll say, I want this to be higher importance, or I want this to, have better evidence. And so I'll use that after every prompt to massage it if I see it putting things in that I don't agree with. Yeah. But I think it's great for a first draft for people that are stuck and they're not sure where to start. Yeah, we'll go with more questions.
Okay, somewhat related, but maybe slightly different. Do you find in your interactions with teams that if you have people that don't have subject matter expertise running through this process because they wouldn't necessarily be able to spot some of these problems?
Yeah, so what I try to do is when we come back to our 3 circles, so and I do cover this in the book a bit in team design, and I had somebody actually this week ask me like why I even covered team design in the beginning of the book. But these 3 circles, what I try to do is I try to find representation inside the company that can represent each theme. And so if I'm working with a startup founder, they might be able to represent multiple themes. But when I'm doing this inside a company, I try to find people that can speak to the desirability risk, or I try to find people that can speak to the viability risk and the feasibility risk. Sometimes it's obvious. Obviously, you can get software developers to talk about feasibility risk. With desirability and viability, though, may not be as obvious because your product people, depending on what product means in your company, you could be pulled more into viability or you could be pulled more into desirability or you're straddling both. I often rely on UX researchers, sales, marketing, sometimes account management. Often with feasibility, I'll bring in legal and compliance sometimes because there could be compliance things that would kill the idea, even though feasibly we could build it. So I do think it's important for you to find folks that even if they're not part of the core team, they can come in and help answer some of the questions. And even if you can't do your whole map at once, you can always have a map and say, hey, what's missing? What would you put in here? I also do that with stakeholders too, where they might not have the broadest view, and we bring in a stakeholder and they could spot something, and they do it in a way that I try to coach them up where it doesn't make the team feel super defensive, but we have them add to the map. So I kind of skipped over this, but I definitely try to find people that can represent each theme when we're going through this. Yeah, good question.
I got a couple from Zoom real quick. Any suggestions for how we could train the GPT by feeding data obtained from discovery interviews and experiments that will help with identifying the level of evidence to prove, disprove assumptions?
Yeah, I usually use custom GPTs for that kind of work. So if you go on the OpenAI store, you'll see something called Assumptions GPT, and then there's an Experiments GPT, and those are custom ones I've trained on data with literally uploading data and training it. So if I'm working with a company and they want that level of customization, you can either do it through the prompts, but more than likely they're doing it behind a firewall with some kind of walled off version of GPT, and they can, using Copilot or something, they can start uploading files to it. But what I've done publicly anyway is used custom GPTs, which the prompts I give you pretty much give you everything almost you need to build a custom GPT. So if you wanted to go and create one, and you can also start uploading files and stuff to it as well. So if you want more sort of control over it, you can just take the prompts I gave you today and then go in and make your own custom one. It's actually pretty straightforward to do. It's not necessarily like you have to be a programmer to do it.
All right, and related to that is, what about organizations that are scared about IP or security with Chat GPT?
Yeah, so kind of like my first question. So I have some clients, I won't name them, they've locked it at the firewall inside their company. But what they've done is they have something that's hosted behind the firewall that's more locked down, and they use that instead. And they've rebranded it for their company. So it's got their company's branding or something on it, but it's more like a Copilot thing. So what I see is, well, the security officers are kind of waging this war at the moment. And the compromise is we're going to block ChatGPT at the firewall, but we're going to have our own custom thing behind the scenes that's more locked down that we can use for our stuff. That's a trend I see anyway with big companies.
Yeah. Uh, yeah.
Yeah.
Question. So you said that, these chat GPTs are kind of a people pleaser. So is it something that we need to test out with various, like various models, like say Anthropic or Gemini, to kind of get a, kind of a similar answer, which kind of, makes you believe that your product is on the right track?
Yeah, that's happened in some of my workshops. So
Okay.
sometimes I do public workshops on GPT, and I've had my attendees use different versions of GPT.
Okay.
And the prompts still work pretty well. And so if you feel the need to put it in different ones, I think the prompts work pretty well in different types of GPT. So if you want to do that to kind of put them against each other, what I noticed though in my workshops is the results were pretty similar. So that's not always the case, but I think if you wanted to be almost have like a second opinion, you could always paste in the Claude or something else
Okay.
and then see how the results match up.
Okay. And one more question, like, like where does the product roadmap falls within this EMT process? Is it like the first phase? Like where does it actually fall?
So it could be an input to the exercise. So if you have a roadmap, I don't know. This is a very like company specific thing. But let's say you already have a product roadmap. What I would look at that roadmap and say, what big assumptions are we making in this roadmap? And then do we have a plan to address those? Or do we have a roadmap full of things we're just going to build by a certain date and be on time, on budget, on scope? And so I think I first learned this kind of like working with Adobe back in the day, because I advised on their a lot of their apps went through this process. And what I noticed was the roadmaps they're almost like discovery items in the roadmap, right? It wasn't just chocked full of features and release dates. And so I err on the side of, can you look at your map and then start looking at these three themes and use that as the input to, I think I was drawing it out here, to this process, right? So your roadmap if you're looking at your roadmap, I would start seeing what is in your roadmap that line up to these themes of risk, and then can you start making sort of your plan to de-risk your roadmap? That's one way, because if I'm pulled in and things are already in flight, that's the way I approach it. But if I'm pulled in and things are super early, we would start this at the very beginning of the product ideas. But if you have a roadmap, I'm hoping not everyone has a roadmap chock full of features and dates. We can talk about this after the talk if we want to. But you would look at it and say, what kind of big assumptions are we making in this roadmap that would have to be true? And then start pulling this in and using this as sort of your discovery process.
Okay, thank you.
One more from Zoom, which was, do you believe people might miss important assumptions or hypotheses because ChatGPT draft feels good enough and people won't put their thinking caps on?
I hope not. I would say there are usually two reasons I'm pulled into companies, it seems recently. One is to create a common language, which I'm trying to do with the desirable, viable, feasible framing. I've had that land really well with executives and teams. Once I explain it once, the teams start getting it. And so I've been in a lot of board review meetings where people are using desirable, viable, feasible. So it's been good. The other is to teach critical thinking skills. And so I'm hoping this continues to be a trend where we're trying to push information to where the decisions need to happen, or decisions where the information is. So, for example, it's really tough for chief product officers and everybody at the top to say, I have this brilliant idea and it's going to trickle down, we're going to execute. What I'm seeing more of is the teams that are closest to the customer find these unsolved opportunities and they bring them with their plan, with their experiment plan. So it may not be completely finished, but they've sketched out, hey, what are the big assumptions in this idea and how might we go test those? And that gives your stakeholders something to respond to. So I'm not using it to replace critical thinking. It's more just to augment. But I would hope that people don't just rely on this solely. I would hope that they're really being put in a situation environment where their critical thinking skills are improving and being nurtured and they're being trained on that and they're able to make decisions. So that's my long-winded answer, but I do see that a theme in my clients where common language and critical thinking skills are becoming more and more top of mind for at least the execs. And they want their teams to have those. So they're not talking past one another. And also so that if they see an opportunity, they can spot it, bring it to the stakeholders, but bring it to them with a plan to de-risk it, even if it's the early part of the plan.
I was going to ask, can you share a story or example from your client work of where they used GPT for the experimentation process and they got a better result than if they wouldn't had used it?
With the name of a company?
Not with any of a
Probably
company, but just
not.
say like just say a company I was working with. This was their general. This is kind of the scenario. I'm having a hard time when I saw that output. I could maybe see that it kind of helps me develop like a framework, but I was having a hard time seeing how it would like really be helpful for me. So a story would help me understand how that's worked well.
Yeah. So again, I don't come off and give talks very often. I'm usually behind the scenes working on stuff. So so I do have a client right now where I'm pulling, and Dan and I were talking about this before for the meetup tonight. I'm pulling like 5 to 7 teams at a time with real ideas through this process. And I've ran through 7 cohorts of teams. Okay. And what I was noticing was during some of those, they would just get stuck. It's like, I don't know how to write assumptions. I don't know what assumptions to even begin to write down. And so this helps them sort of like generate, now they're using custom inside, but it helps them generate the assumptions as a starting point. So I wouldn't say every team I'm working with is adopting GPT, but I'm saying that the teams I'm working with that are stuck and they feel like I don't even know how to write desirable, viable, feasible assumptions down, no matter how much I'm explaining to him in the workshop and giving him examples, it gives them a starting point to then something to respond to versus just staring at a blank sticky and kind of being froze. And to be honest, I'm actually still kind of surprised by that because I feel like I do a pretty good job teaching this and facilitating it. And you can probably tell by my style, and I still have people that get stuck. And I'm not really sure why they're stuck, to be honest. Maybe it's I'm afraid to write anything down because I'm gonna be held accountable for it. Maybe it's they feel embarrassed to write something down. I'm not sure. But for those situations, I'm using the GPTs just to get them started so there's some momentum whatsoever. And so I'm not necessarily wholesale applying it across all my teams, but I'm using it where teams are just, I'm going through this 3-step process and they're like stuck on the first part and they're having a hard time writing down anything because it's a different way of working. They're used to being thrown requirements or thrown documents to work on. So the idea of you're going to write down your assumptions, we don't always make space for that in our work. That's what I've noticed.
Well, thank you, David. That was very good. I wanted to double click on an area. I saw that multiple of the assumptions that were to be tested were around asking a user their opinion around something. How to find if something is really desirable. 50% or more say that they would do this. One next step that I find quite challenging for teams too is deciding how to ask those questions or how to get that data without having to ask a literal question. Is this something that you also have prescriptive advice for how to get that raw information unbiased from those people that you want to interview?
I mean, there's some great books. I give some advice in my book about how to write a script. I know not every, it's depending on who you ask, you either have a script or you don't. I usually err on the side of having a script because I do think it helps you narrow back in on this part here, right? We're trying to narrow in on the things that are most important with the least amount of evidence. I don't necessarily really want to learn about stuff down here right away. And so what I've noticed with my clients is that sometimes they get in front of customers and they kind of just chat, they just hang out and they don't really learn what they need to learn. So I do have some scripts I like. Another book I like is The Mom Test, which has a horrible title, but it's a great book. And it gives you really good practical techniques that you can use to apply. But I think it's deceptively hard to do. And so sometimes what we'll do is we'll put the interview script in GPT and say, is there something we're missing here? Or is there something here that you would ask a different way? I don't necessarily use the GPT to do the interview because I do think we have to talk to real people, but that's just me. But I do think it can help you with your script, or it can help you also if you're looking at your notes from your interview and you want to start synthesizing those to an extent. But I do believe it's so hard to ask a question and not accidentally have the answer in the question you're asking.
Yeah.
So that's what I love about Steve Portigal's work. I'm a huge fan of his work as well. And I think that's something I learned from him, which is, you do have to structure it a certain way to get what you need to learn. And the other thing you can do in the book is we have other techniques you pair with interviews. So I'm also noticing there's too many interviews going on where we're just hanging out talking. I like doing card sorting or speedboat or buy a feature or some kind of prioritization exercise where it's not just us talking. And so that's something I also evangelize with my clients is let's do other things with the customer in those interviews so we can get better information from them. And so I like pairing things with the interviews as well.
I really like that. And you will get that script from the metrics that you need to extract to validate that assumption. No?
Yeah, so I'm always coming back to here. I'm coming back to the top right. What are the most important things with the least amount of evidence? And then let's write a script to learn about those things, especially if they're orange. So if they're desirability, I like using basing it off of where your risk is and then writing a script that helps you learn about that.
Think of it. And we just had Steve here December. I hosted Steve. And so his book is called Interviewing Users. So I recommend that. What I can imagine is the next step is once if you go to the ChatGPT in that table that you had, David, I can imagine that if you're struggling to come up with the questions to ask, it's good at generating tests. So yeah, so you could be like, say that assumption, the experiment, right? You could say like, hey, here's what I want to ask about. Can you give me, a draft discussion guide or I don't know, draft questions to ask? I mean, I don't know. Would that be?
Yeah. And again, I don't really have it do everything for me, but I like it reviewing things or giving me a draft that I can go and
Right.
edit.
I think your question's like, okay, okay, I want to go test the people. I'm going to go do interviews with PMs about their backlog prioritization. I literally don't know what questions to ask. Like I'm the bootstrap problem of like, I'm not a professional UX researcher. I could see ChatGPT giving you a draft of one of that if you have the right prompt.
So I didn't go into deep research tonight because I was just keeping it at just prompt level. But I got access to deep research whenever it came out for ChatGPT a couple weeks ago, I think it was. And I asked it to go, because this is another thing I have with my team. Sometimes they don't know where to go find the people they need to interview. And it took about 18 minutes and it gave me all these different sources from Reddit forums to conferences to other proprietary forums, all these different places I could go and interview the kind of people that I need to talk to. And it cited all the sources and it did it in 18 minutes. So I think I'm still playing with that. That's still pretty new. But this idea of, well, I don't know where to go, it can actually cite sources and do some of that discovery with you. I was playing with another cat idea. I don't know what was the theme of cats tonight, but I was doing a cat wearables idea. It started doing research and it ended up in a weird angle into like, I think it was catalytic converters for cars. And it actually in the side said, oh, this isn't helpful. I'm going to back up. And it showed me its thought process and it stopped going down that route for automotive because I was going for, cat owners. So it's still pretty new, but you can also use it to do really deeper research to say, where can I find my customers to interview? And sometimes if you have an established product, that's not a big problem. You have a new product, new customer, or you're taking an existing product and going for a new customer, you might be stuck with, I don't know how to get to that. Where do they hang out, online, offline? How do I reach them? You can use deep research for that to start sketching out your plan.
That's cool. Question. You gave a couple of great examples of using LLMs for planning experiments, but do you have any experience, or maybe in your customers, of using LLMs for running experiments? So maybe, like you do discovery with LLMs and then validation with real users, or in one of your diagrams, you said that using information from forums could be very useful, but well, every LLM basically exists, probably read every possible forum and so on. So where do you think we can go next with using LLMs in the whole process, not just in planning the process?
Yeah, I mostly use it, as you can tell, I'm mostly using it as a helper for the extracting, mapping, and testing, or at least coming up with a plan for testing. I use it in very specific situations through testing, but what I haven't yet played with and I'm excited about is, what if we want to use it at different parts of this journey, right? What if we want to use it here and here and here and here to help with this part? So that is not to a level I've been to yet, but it's not a huge leap, right? Because now you can start plugging these things into Zapier and other things. So I do think, especially with agents, you can go off and start kicking off processes as well now. And so I do think it's changing almost every week as far as what the capabilities are. I'm not personally using it to run the experiments. I'm still kind of old school there, I guess, a little bit, because I'm literally coaching the teams through the experimentation. But I could totally see you using it for planning, but then going that extra step and using the agents to go off and run experiments. Again, I like the human in the loop process, so I'm a little nervous about trusting it to go off and run an experiment for me and come back with the results. But who knows? I might change my mind a year from now. But right now, I'm mostly using it for as an extra team member through the planning, extracting, mapping, and planning process.
Hey, thank you. I had two quick questions about the prompting. One, I wanted to know if you have a rough sense of how much time using ChatGPT saves an average team rather than doing it, the EMT process without ChatGPT.
Yeah, so let me jump back to the process. So I would say I'm going to give you ballpark numbers here. So when I'm going through this with teams, because I'm always coaching teams behind the scenes, I'm spending about 3 hours on each part of this just to start to sketch out our plan, right? You saw how quickly it generated 5 to 8 assumptions for each theme, like that. So I haven't done all the math, but again, I don't want the teams completely relying on it, but it can significantly, especially if a team's stuck and they can't make it through the process, it definitely speeds it up. But just to give you an idea of how I work, I'm giving you like the speed dating version of this stuff today. I usually we deeply go into extracting and make sure we have representation in the room. We really understand what the risk is. We make sure we do the mapping and the testing. So it doesn't always work out this way, but we're usually, these are hard conversations we're having. Even just the prioritization of it, you get a lot of strong opinions in the room. We're trying to take a lot of I'm just going to do whatever my boss puts the sticky wherever and I'm going to just agree with. So there's a lot of facilitation tricks I use there. But if you think about speeding it up, you can see how quickly it starts to generate them. So at least they're not completely stuck. So I haven't done, again, the math, but, you know, it definitely helps speed along the process for the teams that are just like, they can't even get the stickies out, or they're really having a hard time.
Yeah, that makes sense. The other question I wanted to know was when you were going through your prompts, it seemed to me like there might have been an opportunity to combine some of those prompts into a single step. I was wondering if there's a specific reason why you break them out, or if that's just to kind of demonstrate the process that you want the teams to learn.
Yeah, so coming back to the human in the loop comment again, and I feel like I'm going to be saying this a lot over the next, well, maybe the rest of my career. Let's see. But what I'm trying to do is make sure that we're giving people the ability to say, I can provide feedback, and then is there anything missing, incorrect, or unclear, or something I want to change? When I combine everything into one prompt, which I've tried to do, I feel as if, oh, 3 steps ago, I wanted to change something, and now it's this long document. So that's why, if you notice that all the prompts, and you can customize these prompts however you see fit, I'm asking, right, do you agree with the rankings? Or here I'm asking, is there anything that you would change or move based on evidence? And here I'm asking, you know, with this plan, does it feel actionable? Would you remove or add or refine anything? So that's the main reason I chunk it up, because when I tried to do it all at once, I realized, oh, I wish I could have stopped it back here. And now I'm all the way down in the experiment, and I really wanted to tweak something about the hypothesis or the assumption. So that's the main reason why I break it up. Yeah. I don't know how long we're in questions. I'm just following your lead. I can answer questions forever.
I'm just gonna make a snarky comment.
Okay.
We need a mic though, but hold on. There-
I'm all for snarky comments too.
Snarky comment on the mic, please. Right here.
I didn't. You made the comment about how the timeline that ChatGPT created was a little aggressive for your teams. Like, it's probably not 90 days. And in the back of my head, I was thinking, I'm like, oh, ChatGPT is as bad as my old development teams in terms of like prioritizing things or estimating this. But now I now see it. You actually prompted ChatGPT to give a 90. I didn't get to see that.
Oh yeah, it's probably because I would do this
So-
quickly. So yeah, up here I'm saying 90.
So you gave it
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
I am.
Okay. I missed that the first time around.
Well, the reason I do that, and let me just take a step back for a second. The reason I do that is because when I'm working with teams, I'm working with these really these ideas that have extreme uncertainty in them, and I don't want them skipping over steps and saying, "Oh, well, of course this is going to be successful, and our problem is scaling, so let's start worrying about how to scale this." So I usually work about on a 90-day timeline, and even when I do that assumptions map, I'm trying to get them narrowed in on like what are the things over the next 90 days that are risky, because I've noticed if I don't set that timeline, teams will jump really far into the future and they make all these logical leaps of how successful they were, and now they're all worried about feasibility and scaling. So I like 90 days. It works pretty well. For my hardware clients, sometimes, it can be a little longer, but what I'm trying to do is get to from a near-term risk and what are some actionable experiments we could run over the next 90 days. That's why I kind of rein it in a bit.
I this is not a snarky question. Sorry. So I mean, I assume that the list of ideas that you came up with really quickly, and you talked about how it sped up your timeline. I assume that there's gray area where you're not just the team is not just accepting the ideas and just okay, we'll just run with them. They're great ideas. We will not prompt it to get more ideas, or we won't add more to them. I assume that there's some back and forth.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
And then it's a bigger, longer conversation, but some of my co-author, Alex, touched on this in his talk back in May, so you can watch that recording. But we often pair this to funding, and how you get funding for your products and your businesses is based on the evidence you generate. So it's a longer conversation, but what we're trying to do is say, we're not going to infinitely fund something without evidence. We want to have sort of this timeline where we come together and we review what were the riskiest assumptions, what did we learn, what do we recommend next, do we pivot, persevere, kill this? So I'm still a big believer in that model, and I'm coaching teams through that. So even if the ideas come in and it doesn't mean they all are successful. They're not doomed to succeed, as Alex would say. So basically what we do is we use this process with metered funding, and we come back and say, okay, we're going to fund this product idea for like 50K, and we're going to go for N number of months, and we're going to come back and say, with the 50K that we've spent on this, what kind of evidence do we have that we should continue to invest in it? And then that is a more productive conversation with stakeholders because they're really looking at, did we reduce risk? My biggest challenge right now is with stakeholders trying to prevent them from funding things because they want it to succeed. So I have to do a lot of coaching around how we scale things, how we grade things as far as evidence goes, because I find that they generally want their teams to succeed and they want the products to succeed. And so they err on the side of giving things funding that maybe shouldn't receive funding. So I'm really struggling with my value prop right now. Maybe y'all can help me. What I really do is I go into companies and we kill off all the bad ideas. But that's not a great value prop for me. So if you have any ideas of how to frame that in a more positive way, I'm definitely open to it. But that's what's happening with a lot of my clients. They've worked on an idea for 3 years in feasibility, and then we started testing desirability, viability, realized there was nothing there, and we killed it. Now, nobody got fired. They just got reassigned or picked up another idea. But I'm still shocked at how frequently that's happening inside companies. Maybe not the companies you work at, but the companies I coach, we have these projects that have been going on, these products for several years, and we've done all kinds of amazing stuff in feasibility, but somehow we've yet to test desirability and viability in a meaningful way. And so this process kind of helps give you sort of a drawing a line in the sand to say, do we keep going with this or not? And I'm realizing a lot of these products don't have criteria for success. So it's been a really interesting ride for me in my coaching career. But that's where I'm finding some enjoyment in this, is that people aren't working on things that don't matter. We're working on things that matter because if there's nothing there, we have a framework for pausing that or parking it. Or my favorite one was compost. I have a sustainability company I'm working with. They're like, we're going to compost this idea. And I was like, I love that. Okay, but we're not working on it anymore, right? They're like, no, we're not working on it anymore. So whatever you want to call it in your company, but you're actively not working on it because the evidence doesn't support making any more investment.
So my question is maybe goes beyond your realm of work, but my question is using AI to do more competitive work. So one of the obvious assumptions for desirability and viability is there is no alternative that's close to what you want to bring to the market. So that's a little bit of understanding the competition as well as then um, how viable your strategy is as well. Have you done some work or do you coach as well in that area of using ChatGPT for?
So that's what I was kind of hinting at the deep research function that they just released. That's what I would use deep research for, is it can go off and do that competitive analysis for you. Now, obviously, you're going to have to review it when it comes back with, but I don't know a lot about deep research because I just started playing with it, but it was pretty user-friendly to say, is there anything else like this out there? And it can go off and do that research for you now. So that's, if you have access to it, I would definitely check it out as far as, can you start your initial desk research using that function? And like I said, it took about 20 minutes for me when I was asking to go find customers. You could easily point it at go find competitive competing products or, existing solutions.
I'll do one last question and then we'll wrap it up.
Sure.
Can you double click on the viability piece? Because the desirability is obvious, right? It's do they want it? The feasibility that a lot of people spend too much time on is the can we do it? Is it technically feasible? But what's the viability thing again in detail?
So in detail, and I have a list of questions in the book you can use as a guide, but it's a lot of the should we. And now I know that might be too high level, so let me bring it down a little bit. Is this thing going to be aligned to where you're going as a company? Are you going to be able to generate revenue for more revenue than it costs? I notice that even when I work with nonprofits and mission-driven companies, so I'm doing a mission-driven workshop later this month. Even they have to be viable in some way. They have to show that they have impact for the budget that they were given, right? Or the funds. So viability is a lot about cost versus revenue. Can we move the needle in some meaningful way? I mentioned Adobe earlier. So when you worked on like some of the Adobe products, we realized we're not going to charge for this Adobe product, but it's going to lead people into Creative Cloud and they're going to become subscribers, hopefully. So even though we weren't charging for it, the viability assumptions were around, will they become Creative Cloud subscribers if we give them a free app that does a specific thing that hooks into Creative Cloud? So a lot of those assumptions are going to be around, can we move the needle in some meaningful way inside the company, whether it be revenue directly or indirectly, and can we do it for the cost that we're going to fund this for? And so maybe that's why it seems a bit not as clear, because it's a should we. But when I say should we, it's like, even if it's desirable and feasible, if it's not viable, it's still going to die because it's not going to be funded. You're not going to be able to keep it going. So viability is a lot about, can we move the needle for cost and revenue? And I can always point you to the book. There's a series of questions I asked that specifically go down and drill into it.
All right, awesome, David. Thank you. Let's give David a warm round of applause here. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thanks.